Rain hammered the window of the small apartment, and Adelaide Lancaster sat perfectly still on the edge of the bed, listening to Marcus pace. She could not see him. She had not seen anything in 5 years. Not his face, not his hands, not the sneer she knew was twisting his mouth right now, because she could hear it in his voice. "You think you're still someone," Marcus said. "You think because your last name used to mean something, you still matter." "Marcus, don't." His footsteps stopped in front of her. "You're not a princess anymore, Adelaide. Your parents are dead. Lancaster Industries is a pile of ash and lawsuits. You're blind, you're broke, and you're 26 years old with nothing to offer anyone, except the one thing you haven't figured out how to sell yet." Her hands tightened in her lap. "I never asked you to save me. I did it anyway." His voice dropped, low and cruel. 5 years, Adelaide. 5 years I fed you, housed you, kept the wolves off you when everyone else wanted a piece of the Lancaster carcass. You think that was free?" She said nothing. There was nothing to say that hadn't already failed to reach him 100 times before. "You owe me," Marcus said, "and I found a way for you to pay me back, all of it, at once." Something cold moved through her chest. "What did you do?" "I found a buyer." The words did not make sense at first. Then they did, and the room seemed to tilt beneath her. "A man named Lucian Sinclair," Marcus continued, and she could hear the greed climbing into his voice like a man watching a jackpot spin into place. "You've heard the name. Everyone has. CEO of Sinclair Industries, and underneath that, the most feared man in this city. People who cross him disappear." "Marcus, what are you saying?" "I'm saying tomorrow night, you're going to a private event, and you are going to belong to him." He crouched in front of her, and she flinched at the sudden nearness of his breath. "And if you're smart, if you're very, very smart, you'll let him get you pregnant." Adelaide's breath caught somewhere between her throat and her chest. "You're insane." "I'm resourceful." He gripped her chin, forcing her blind eyes toward where his face would be. "A Sinclair heir is worth more than every painting your father ever owned. If you're carrying his child, that family will pay anything to control it, to protect it, to keep it quiet. Do you understand what that means for us?" "For us," she repeated, hollow. "There is no us, Marcus. There never was." His grip tightened until it hurt. "There's whatever I decide there is. You have no money, no family, no eyes. You have a body, Adelaide, and tomorrow night, that's going to be enough." She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But 5 years of being told she was worthless, 5 years of being small and dependent, and terrified of the dark that never lifted, had worn something down in her that used to be steel. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this. It's already done." Marcus straightened, and she heard the smile return to his voice, the ugly satisfaction of a man who had already spent money he did not yet have. "Get some sleep, princess. Big night tomorrow." He left her sitting in the dark that was always dark, listening to the rain, and for the first time in 5 years, Adelaide Lancaster understood that the man who claimed to have saved her life was about to end it. She did not remember most of the following night. There were fragments, the itch of unfamiliar silk against her skin, a room that smelled of cedar and rain, a glass placed into her hand by someone who told her it would help her nerves. There was a voice, low and rough, unlike anything she had heard before, saying words she couldn't hold on to. There was warmth and confusion and a fog that swallowed everything into gray. She did not know, could not know, that across that same fogged room, Lucian Sinclair was fighting the same disorienting haze, his mind slipping through his fingers like water, his body responding to something that was not entirely his own will. He did not know her name. He did not know what had been slipped into his glass, or by whom or why the woman in front of him felt like a stranger and an ache all at once. Neither of them understood, in that blurred and tragic night, that they were both being used as pieces on a board neither of them had agreed to play. By morning, Adelaide woke alone in a room she did not recognize, her body sore, her mind scraped clean, and something inside her, something she could not yet name, already changing. 2 months later, a doctor's voice broke the silence of a private clinic on the top floor of Sinclair Tower. "Mr. Sinclair, the pregnancy test is positive. She is 2 months along." Lucian Sinclair stood very still, the way men who have learned to control every visible thing about themselves stand still, and said nothing for a long time. "That's impossible," he finally said. "It's confirmed. Blood work, ultrasound. She's pregnant, and given the timeline, the child is yours." Lucian's jaw worked once, twice. He turned toward the window, city lights bleeding gray through rain-streaked glass. "Get her in here." Adelaide was brought in by a nurse, one hand trailing lightly along the wall, her white cane tapping softly ahead of her. She had no idea what this meeting was, only that men in expensive suits had collected her from Marcus's apartment 3 days ago, with words like compensation and arrangement, and had not explained anything since. "Sit," Lucian said. It was not a request. She found the chair by touch and sat. "You're pregnant," he said, flat, cold, testing the words like a blade against his palm. Adelaide's fingers curled into her skirt. "So I've been told. Did you know? Before that night. Did you and Marcus plan this?" "Plan?" Her voice cracked, disbelief and fury tangled together. "You think I planned this? I think a blind woman with no money and no family has every reason to want a Sinclair heir in her belly." His voice was low, dangerous, controlled rage dressed as calm. "I think Marcus sold you to me because he needed money, and I think getting me to father a child was always the real transaction. You don't know anything about me." Adelaide stood, trembling, chair scraping back. "I didn't ask for that night. I don't remember it. Not clearly, not the way you seem to think I do. I was given something. I felt it in my blood, in my head, like I was drowning in my own skull. I didn't choose this. Marcus chose it. Marcus sold me like livestock and told me if I got pregnant, it would be my only value to anyone, ever." Her voice broke on the last word, and she hated herself for it. "So no, I didn't plan a single second of this." Silence stretched, heavy and combustible. "The doctor says termination isn't safe," Lucian said finally, quieter. "Given her blood pressure and the trauma history in her file." "I wasn't going to ask you for one anyway," Adelaide said. "It's not yours to decide. It's my child. It's my body." Neither of them moved. Two people who had been violated by the same unknown hand stood glaring across a gulf of fury and confusion, each one certain the other was the architect of their ruin. Genevieve Sinclair, Lucian's grandmother, arrived at the tower 2 days later, cane striking marble with the authority of a woman who had buried a husband, a son, and half her faith in humanity, and still refused to be quiet. "You will not punish that child for the sins of grown men," she told Lucian, standing in his office with her spine iron straight. "Whatever was done to that girl, whatever was done to you, the baby had no hand in it. Grandmother, I am not finished." Genevieve's pale eyes, clouded with age but sharp as ever, fixed on her grandson. "You have spent your whole life certain that everyone wants something from you. Maybe they do. But that child is Sinclair blood, and the board is already circling like vultures over a dying deer. Richard wants your seat. Alfred wants your name. You need an heir the board cannot dispute, and God has apparently decided to hand you one, whether you deserve it or not." Lucian said nothing, but something in his shoulders loosened, just slightly. "Marry her," Genevieve said. "She hates me. Good. That will make the marriage more honest than most in this family." She turned for the door, then paused. "Protect her, Lucian. Whatever else you believe about how that child came to exist, protect the mother. It's the only decent thing your father never learned to do." The contract was presented to Adelaide, 3 days later read aloud by a lawyer in a voice as dry as the paper it was printed on. Marriage. Residency at Sinclair Manor. Full medical care. Full security. In exchange, her silence, her compliance, and the child, raised within the Sinclair name. "And if I say no?" Adelaide asked. "Then Marcus retains legal claim to you as his dependent." The lawyer said carefully, "And Mr. Sinclair cannot guarantee your safety once you leave this building." Adelaide sat with that for a long moment. She thought of the apartment, of Marcus's hand around her chin, of 5 years spent as someone's currency. She thought of the child inside her, not yet the size of a plum, already more powerful than she was, already the only leverage she had. "I'll sign," she said. "But I want 2 things. Go on. I want access to Sinclair's art authentication division. My father trained me before he died. Before everything happened. I want to work, even from home. And I want the truth, eventually, about what happened to my parents." There was a pause. Then, from the doorway she had not heard open, a low voice answered. "You'll have both," Lucian said. "Eventually." It was the first time he had spoken to her, without accusation in his voice, and Adelaide did not know what to do with the sudden, unwelcome flicker of relief that moved through her chest. Sinclair Manor was an ocean of marble and silence, and Adelaide learned it the way she had learned every space in her blind years, by sound, by scent, by memorized counts of steps. 14 steps from her bedroom door to the top of the grand staircase. 22 down to the ground floor. The library smelled of leather and old paper, and, faintly, of the cedar and rain scent she now recognized, with a shiver she refused to examine, as Lucian's cologne. He was a strange kind of careful with her. He never took her arm without a low, "May I?" first. He had every threshold in the house marked with raised strips beneath her feet, though he never explained why, and staff were forbidden from rearranging furniture without informing her first. He ordered doctors for her twice a week. He ordered a chef who catered to the strange, sudden cravings of early pregnancy without being asked. He ordered guards stationed at every door of the East Wing, where her rooms were. But he never once said a warm word. "He orders things," Adelaide told the doctor one evening, resting a hand over the small, still flat curve of her stomach, "the way other men order coffee. Like I'm a piece of infrastructure that needs maintaining." "Perhaps," the doctor said gently, "that's the only language he has left." She thought about that more than she wanted to. The manor spoke to her in a language she was learning slowly, piece by piece. The heavy front doors sighed on old brass hinges, a low groan that told her when someone was arriving before any footstep reached her ears. The dining room held a particular echo, marble floors, throwing sound back sharper than the carpeted hallways, so she always knew the moment she crossed from one room into the next. Rain against the tall windows of the East Wing came in 2 distinct rhythms, a soft patter when the wind blew from the sea, a harder, staccato drumming when it came down from the hills, and she found herself, in those first weeks, cataloging the storms the way she used to catalog brushstrokes, searching for a pattern that made the unfamiliar house feel like something she could hold on to. Lucian's presence had its own signature, and she despised how quickly she learned it. The particular weight of his tread, heavier, and more deliberate than any of the staff. The pause he always took before entering a room she was in, as though bracing himself. The scent of cedar and rain that arrived a full 2 seconds before he did. So that some traitorous part of her chest had already begun to react before he ever spoke a word. "You always stop at the door," she said to him once, when he'd paused in exactly that way outside the library. "Habit," he said. "Whose habit?" He didn't answer that time, and she let it go, filing it away instead, among the dozens of small, guarded things she was slowly collecting about the man who had bought her, and now didn't seem to know what to do with her. Once, in the second week, she woke from a nightmare about Marcus's hands and found herself disoriented, panicked, unable for a terrible 30 seconds to remember where she was or whether she was safe. She had cried out, and within moments, faster than any guard could have responded. Lucian was at her door. "Adelaide." His voice, low and urgent, cut through the panic like a lifeline. "You're at the manor. You're safe. No one is going to touch you here. How did you get here so fast?" A pause. "My rooms are 2 doors down. I hear better than most people give me credit for." He did not come in. He simply stood in the doorway, a steady, solid presence in the dark, until her breathing slowed and the shaking in her hands subsided, and then, without another word, he left her to sleep. It was the first night in 5 years that Adelaide did not lie awake afterward, straining to hear if danger was still coming. Richard Sinclair visited on a Tuesday, his voice a smooth, oily thing that reminded Adelaide instantly of every collector who had once tried to swindle her father out of a painting's true value. "So this is her," Richard said, not to Adelaide, but about her, as though she were an object recently delivered. "The blind thing Lucian's chosen to breed with." The room went very still. "Richard," Lucian said, and his voice had dropped into a register Adelaide had not heard before. Quiet, and far more frightening than shouting would have been. "I'm only saying what the board is thinking," Richard continued, unbothered. "A woman who can't see her own hand in front of her face, mothering the next generation of this family. It's almost poetic, blind leading blind." Adelaide heard Lucian move, a single controlled step, chair legs screeching faintly against marble as he rose. She heard the air change, the way a room changes right before violence. "Lucian," she said quickly, before she could think better of it. "Don't. He wants a scene. Don't give him one." The room held its breath. Then, slowly, she heard Lucian's footsteps retreat, heard the tight, furious exhale through his nose. "Get out of my house, Richard," Lucian said. Richard laughed, low and unbothered, and left with the unhurried gait of a man who believed he had already won something. When the door closed, Adelaide let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You stopped me," Lucian said quiet, almost bewildered. "I didn't stop you," Adelaide corrected. "I asked you to stop yourself. There's a difference." He didn't answer, but she noted, filed away in the growing ledger of things she was learning about this dangerous, complicated man, that when she asked, he listened. Alfred Sinclair arrived a week later, and everything about him sounded gentler. "Adelaide," he said, and something in the warmth of it made her chest ache with an unfamiliar, unplaceable nostalgia. "Do you remember me? Summers, at your family's estate. I used to steal apricots from your mother's garden." Something flickered at the edge of her memory. Laughter, sunlight, a boy with a bright, easy voice. "Alfred," she said slowly. Yes, I remember. I brought you these." He pressed something soft and fragrant into her hands. Flowers, their petals silken beneath her fingers. White peonies. "You used to love them." Tears pricked unexpectedly at her eyes. No one in 5 years had remembered anything about who she used to be. How did you know that? I remember everything about you, Alfred said, voice low, almost tender. Lucian is not a good man, Adelaide. I know he's shown you kindness, dressed up as protection, but you should know what he is beneath it. He's a monster in a very good suit. Later, when Lucian found her still holding the peonies, his voice went sharp and cold. Stay away from Alfred. He was kind to me. He is more dangerous than you can possibly imagine, Lucian said. And for the first time, she heard something beneath the anger. Something that sounded almost like fear. Whatever he tells you, whatever he brings you, do not trust it. Why? Lucian was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice stripped of its usual armor, he told her. His father had betrayed his mother. An affair that produced Alfred, hidden for years, revealed only after his mother's death. His mother had died in a car crash while trying to leave the marriage. Brakes failed on a mountain road that still, to this day, made Lucian's hands shake when he drove it. And after her death, when Lucian was still a boy, he had been kidnapped, held for 11 days, tortured for information about his father's business, before a ransom was paid, and he was returned, changed, forever. I was 7, Lucian said. I learned that love makes you a target, that the people who are supposed to protect you can be the reason you get hurt. I don't know how to want something without preparing for it to be used against me. Adelaide sat with that revelation, like it was a stone dropped into still water, ripples moving through everything she'd assumed about him. That's not an excuse to imprison someone with kindness, she said gently. But I understand it a little better now. The auction was held in a glass-domed hall downtown. Champagne and old money, and the low murmur of people who had never once had to wonder where their next meal came from. Adelaide walked beside Lucian, her hand resting lightly on his forearm, listening to the room shift and murmur around her. There's the blind wife, someone whispered, not quietly enough. Imagine married for an heir, and she can't even see the ring on her own finger. Adelaide's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Lucian's voice cut across the room, low and absolute. My wife, he said, loud enough for the nearby cluster of socialites to hear clearly, has more vision than every person in this room combined. I'd be careful whose intelligence you question. The whispering stopped. Then the auctioneer's voice rose over the crowd, announcing the next lot, and Adelaide felt something cold slide down her spine before the words even fully registered. Lot 14, an exceptional oil piece, the Garden of Eden, provenance disputed but believed to originate from a private European collection. The Garden of Eden, her mother's painting, the one that had vanished the year everything collapsed. Lucian, she breathed, I need to touch it, please. He guided her forward without question, and when her fingers finally found the canvas, careful and reverent, the room fell away entirely. She traced the raised texture of the brushwork, the layered oils her mother used to describe to her as a child, back when Adelaide could still see the colors herself. Her mother's technique had been loose, alive, imperfect in the way real passion always is. This was not that. It's a forgery, Adelaide whispered. What? The brushwork is too even, too mechanical. My mother's hand shook slightly on every canvas. A tremor from an old injury. This has no tremor. Someone copied the composition perfectly and missed the soul entirely. Her voice hardened. Buy it anyway. I need it in the house. Lucian's bid rang out moments later, $10 million, and a ripple of shocked silence moved through the room before applause, hesitant and awed, followed. Why? He asked her quietly as they left. The painting crated and following behind them. Does a forgery matter so much to you? Because forgeries don't create themselves. Adelaide said. Someone stole my mother's real painting. Someone sold a fake to cover the theft, and I intend to find out who. Lucian granted her access to the Sinclair art authentication files, on strict conditions: no travel, rest whenever her body demanded it, and a doctor's approval before any strain. Adelaide accepted every term without argument, because it gave her exactly what she needed: a door into the truth. She spent weeks buried in transfer records, shell company registries, insurance filings from a decade of quiet, high-value transactions. She traced the Garden of Eden through 3 shadow buyers before the trail led to a name that made her blood run cold: Blue Ocean Holdings, a company with documented, if buried, ties to Sinclair Industries. She sat with that discovery for 2 sleepless nights, her hand pressed to the small curve of her stomach, terror curling through her. He did this, she thought. Lucian destroyed my family. But something nagged at her, some instinct honed over years of studying provenance and forged signatures, and she forced herself to keep digging instead of accusing. The transaction dates, the acquisition timeline. She cross-referenced them obsessively, and finally found what the surface records had hidden. Lucian had acquired Blue Ocean Holdings 3 months after the Garden of Eden sale had already occurred. He hadn't stolen it. He had inherited a company that had already been used as a laundering vessel by someone else. Someone who still, quietly, held significant influence over Blue Ocean's earlier board. Richard Sinclair. Adelaide's hands trembled over the documents. Relief and horror tangled together in her chest. Relief that Lucian was not the monster who destroyed her family. Horror at how close she had come to believing it. And fury, cold and clean, at the man who actually had. Something else was happening to Adelaide, slow and quiet as dawn breaking over a long night. It began with light, a gray smear where there had only been black, faint and swimming at the edges of her vision during a quiet evening in the manor's garden. She said nothing. Days later, shapes emerged, the blurred outline of a rose bush, the suggestion of a fountain. Still, she said nothing. The doctor, informed in confidence, examined her carefully and explained what neurology had long theorized about trauma-induced blindness. Your eyes were never damaged, Mrs. Sinclair. Your mind closed a door it believed was protecting you. Sometimes, when a person begins to feel safe again, truly safe, truly protected, the mind starts to consider opening that door once more. I feel safe here, Adelaide admitted, startled by her own words. For the first time in 5 years, I feel safe. Then your body may be starting to agree with you. She did not tell Lucian. Not yet. She told herself it was strategic, that Richard and Alfred did not know, and that ignorance was leverage she could not afford to surrender while she was still gathering evidence against them. But some small, honest part of her also knew she was afraid. Afraid that the moment she could see clearly, the moment she looked upon Lucian Sinclair's face for the first time, something in her chest that she had been carefully not naming would become impossible to deny. The first time she truly saw him, really saw him, sharp and unblurred in the low evening light of the library. He was reading. His sleeves rolled to the forearm, a small furrow between his brows, cufflinks discarded on the desk beside him. He looked nothing like the monster the city whispered about. He looked, in that unguarded moment, tired and human and lonely in a way that made her chest ache. She looked away before he could catch her staring, and said nothing about what she had just seen. Their closeness grew in small, careful increments, neither of them acknowledged aloud. He learned to change the bandage on her hand after a small kitchen accident. his fingers surprisingly gentle for hands the city feared so completely. "Your hands don't match the rumors," Adelaide said quietly one evening, tracing the calluses and old scars along his knuckles with her fingertips, still performing blindness even as her vision sharpened daily. "The stories say you're a monster, but your hands are careful, patient. They tell a different story. Rumors keep people from testing whether the stories are true," Lucian said. "It's safer that way. For everyone. Is it safer for you?" He didn't answer that. She began teaching him, in slow evening sessions in the manor's sunroom, the way her father had once taught her. How to feel the texture of oil against canvas, how to understand composition, not as decoration, but as intention. Lucian, to her surprise, was a careful and attentive student, his large hands moving with unexpected delicacy across practice canvases. "You have good instincts," she told him one evening. "I have practiced reading what people don't want me to see," Lucian said. "Paintings aren't so different from liars." "The monster is a masterpiece in disguise," Adelaide murmured, half to herself. "What?" "Nothing." She smiled, small and private, grateful in that moment that he could not see her face clearly enough in the dim light to catch the softness in it. Just thinking out loud. The deeper Adelaide dug into the records, the more she understood that she was not merely investigating a company. She was investigating a decade of careful, patient cruelty, and the man behind it had covered his tracks with the same meticulous attention he brought to everything else. Richard had not simply stolen from her family. He had orchestrated their ruin slowly, over years, siphoning small amounts from Lancaster Industries' shipping contracts, long before the final collapse, building a paper trail that made her father's signature appear on transactions he had never authorized. She found herself, late one night, staring at a scanned image of her father's forged signature until her eyes burned, remembering the real one. The way he used to sign birthday cards with a flourish on the final letter, a habit the forger had gotten almost right, but not quite. Almost was not enough to fool a court. It had been enough, apparently, to fool a grieving city, eager for a villain who could no longer defend himself. She wept, once alone in the library at 2 a.m, not for the money or the company, but for the 5 years her father's name had been spoken with contempt, in rooms he would never again enter to correct. Lucian found her there, though she never learned whether it was coincidence or the same quiet vigilance that had brought him to her door the night of her nightmare. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, standing in the doorway, careful not to come closer without invitation. "I've been doing everything alone for 5 years," Adelaide said. "It's hard to remember how to do it any other way." He crossed the room slowly and sat, not beside her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and said nothing else. He simply stayed, reading his own papers in silence, until the ache in her chest eased enough for her to keep working. It became, without either of them naming it, a ritual. Long nights in the library, her documents and his ledgers spread across the same table. The quiet companionship of two people who had both learned that grief was easier to carry when it wasn't carried alone. Alfred's visits grew more frequent and more unsettling. "I've loved you since we were children," he told her one afternoon in the garden, his voice trembling with an intensity that made her skin crawl even before his hand closed around her wrist. "You should have been mine, Adelaide. Not his. Never his. Alfred, let go of me. He doesn't deserve you. He doesn't deserve anything he has." His grip tightened, and Adelaide's pulse spiked with real fear. Her vision, sharp now, though he did not know it, locking onto the desperate, unstable glint in his eyes. Let go, she said, again harder. The next moment, Lucian's hand closed around Alfred's wrist with brutal, immediate force, wrenching him away from her. Touch her again, Lucian said, voice dropped into something ancient and lethal, and I will remove the hand that did it. Lucian! Adelaide stepped forward quickly, heart hammering. Don't, please, not like this. Lucian's fist had already drawn back, murder plain in the set of his jaw, but at her voice he stopped, chest heaving, control visibly warring with fury. He released Alfred with a shove that sent him stumbling. Get off my property, Lucian said, before I stop listening to her. Alfred straightened his jacket, smoothing the desperation from his face until only cold amusement remained. You're weak, Lucian. Letting a blind woman tell you when to stop. She's not blind to what matters, Lucian said, which is more than I can say for you. When Alfred was gone, Adelaide turned to Lucian, breathless. You listen to me again. I always listen to you, Lucian said low. I just don't always know how to say it without it sounding like an order. For the first time since the night that had bound them together in confusion and fog, Adelaide felt something in her chest unclench completely, something dangerously close to hope. The betrayal, when it came, arrived dressed as proof. Marcus, resurfaced and desperate for money, after his earlier scheme collapsed around him, had reached out to Alfred with information to sell. Grainy security photos. Adelaide in the garden with Alfred, hand caught in his grip in a frame that made it look intimate rather than violent. Audio, badly edited, of Adelaide's voice discussing Sinclair Company structures with a man Alfred claimed was a private investigator. And, worst of all, a photograph. Adelaide's eyes, open and clear and unmistakably sighted, caught by a hidden camera during one of her late-night research sessions in the library. Lucian received the folder in his office late one evening, and Adelaide, arriving moments later to bring him tea out of quiet, unspoken habit, walked into a silence so cold it stopped her at the threshold. You can see, Lucian said. Adelaide's breath caught. There was no point denying it now. Yes, for how long? Weeks, she admitted. I didn't. You didn't tell me. His voice had gone flat, dangerous. You've been meeting with Alfred, recording conversations, investigating my company. And you let me believe you were blind this entire time. Lucian, it's not what it looks like, isn't it? He stood, the folder scattering across the desk between them. The photographs, the audio transcript, the damning, curated fiction Alfred had constructed with surgical precision. You used my protection. You investigated my family under the guise of helplessness, and you let my brother touch you in my own garden. He grabbed me. I told you to stop him because I didn't want you to become a murderer over a man who isn't worth prison. You've been lying to me since the moment you started seeing again, Lucian said, and beneath the fury, she could hear something else. Something broken. Something that sounded almost like a boy who had learned, at 7 years old, that everyone he trusted eventually used him. I should have known. Everyone who's ever gotten close to me wanted something. That's not fair. Fair? He laughed, short and humorless. You were sold to me, Adelaide. Your boyfriend sold you like livestock, and I still let you into my house, my company, my. He stopped himself before he said the word, jaw clenching hard enough that a muscle jumped beneath his skin. I trusted you. Then trust me now, Adelaide said, desperate. Ask me why. Ask me what I found instead of assuming the worst. But Lucian was no longer listening. He was already retreating into the fortress he had built at 7 years old, brick by brick, the one that told him love always ended in betrayal. You'll stay in the East Wing, he said, voice gone terrifyingly calm. Under guard. For your safety and the child's. You're locking me up. I'm protecting what's mine. I am not a thing you own, Adelaide said, her voice shaking with fury and grief. I never was. He did not answer. He simply turned away, and the guards outside the door closed it gently, but firmly, behind her. The room they gave her was, in its own way, exquisite. Silk sheets, fresh flowers, replaced daily. Meals prepared to her exact preferences, delivered on schedule. A private garden view. Every comfort imaginable, curated with the same obsessive attention. Lucian gave everything he tried to control. It was, in every meaningful sense, a beautiful cage. This is not love, Adelaide told him. The one time he came to check on her himself, standing at a careful, deliberate distance from the door, as though proximity itself might be a weapon. It's protection. It's a prison with better lighting. She stood, chin lifted, eyes clear now, unmistakably sighted, unmistakably furious, meeting his directly for the first time since the truth had come out. You want to know why I hid my sight? Because the moment Richard and Alfred learned, I could see I would lose the only advantage I had to prove what they did to my family and what they're planning to do to yours. I wasn't hiding it from you to hurt you, Lucian. I was hiding it to protect us both. Prove it, Lucian said, voice rough. Tell me you love me. Prove that everything between us wasn't a performance for your investigation. Adelaide's chest ached because the answer was yes, she did love him, achingly and completely, in a way that terrified her more than blindness ever had. But she would not say it, not like this. Not as a hostage's confession extracted through a locked door. No, she said quietly. No, you don't love me? Or no, you won't say it? I won't say it to a man whose decided love means keeping me caged, Adelaide said. If you ever want to hear the truth from me, Lucian, you'll have to let me go first. He left without another word, and Adelaide sat alone in her beautiful prison, one hand resting on the small swell of her stomach, and made a decision that had nothing to do with him at all. She would finish what she started, for her parents, for the child, for herself. Working in secret, using a laptop smuggled to her by a sympathetic member of the household staff who had watched Richard humiliate her once too often. Adelaide finished assembling the case that had taken her months to build. Financial records tracing Richard Sinclair's decade-long embezzlement scheme, which had used Lancaster Industries as a laundering channel before orchestrating its public collapse. Insurance filings proving Richard had ordered the forged Garden of Eden painted specifically to replace the stolen original before anyone noticed it was missing. Maintenance logs from a private garage, doctored the week before Adelaide's parents' fatal crash. The same garage, she discovered with cold, sick certainty, responsible for servicing Lucian's mother's car nearly 2 decades earlier. Brake sabotage, the same method, the same family, the same architect, and, buried in an encrypted email thread between Richard and a mountain road contractor, a final, chilling detail, plans for road maintenance scheduled along the same treacherous pass where Lucian's mother had died, timed to coincide with an upcoming board retreat. Lucian was expected to attend. They were going to kill him. The same way they'd killed his mother. The same way they'd killed her parents. Adelaide's hands shook as she compiled the final file. She did not want private revenge. She wanted public justice. Justice loud enough that no Sinclair board member, no city official, no whispering socialite could ever again pretend Richard's cruelty was simply the cost of doing business. She sent the complete file to the one person in the household she still trusted absolutely, Genevieve Sinclair. The board meeting convened 3 days later in the glass-walled chamber atop Sinclair Tower. Richard standing at the head of the table, with the easy confidence of a man who believed his takeover was already secured. Alfred seated beside him, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "The board has lost confidence in Lucian's leadership," Richard announced, voice smooth and rehearsed. "Erratic behavior, a hasty marriage to a woman of questionable stability, financial decisions made under obvious emotional strain. I move that control of Sinclair Industries be transferred." The doors opened. Adelaide walked in first, spine straight, eyes clear and locked directly on Richard for the first time since she'd arrived at the manor as a blind, broken woman handed over like currency. Genevieve followed at her side, and behind them, 4 uniformed police officers and a woman in a sharp gray suit who introduced herself without preamble as a detective from the Financial Crimes Division. "Mrs. Sinclair," Richard said, his composure cracking at the edges. "This is a private board meeting." "It was," Adelaide said. "Not anymore." She placed a single folder on the table. "Richard Sinclair orchestrated the collapse of Lancaster Industries. He stole my mother's art collection and had a forgery commissioned to hide the theft. He falsified the maintenance records on the vehicle that killed my parents. And," her voice hardened, echoing through the silent chamber, "he arranged the exact same method to kill his own nephew during the upcoming board retreat." The room erupted into noise, shouted questions, scraping chairs, Richard's voice rising in furious denial that grew thinner with every word as the detective produced her own copies of the documents, confirming what Adelaide had already found. Lucian, seated at the far end of the table, had gone utterly still, his eyes fixed on Adelaide with an expression she could not fully read. Shock, and something rawer beneath it, something that looked almost like shame. "Take him," the detective said, and 2 officers moved forward, cuffing Richard's wrists as he screamed accusations that no one in the room believed anymore. Adelaide's father was cleared of every embezzlement charge. Within the hour, the truth spreading through financial news networks by evening. 5 years of humiliation, undone in a single afternoon. As the room emptied, Lucian crossed to where Adelaide stood, his voice low, raw. "You did this, all of it, while I locked you away and called it protection. I did it because it needed to be done," Adelaide said. "Not for you, for my parents, for the truth." "Adelaide, I'm not finished being angry with you," she said quietly, "but I am finished hiding." Before he could respond, a hand closed hard around her arm from behind, and a cloth pressed hard against her mouth, and the last thing Adelaide saw before darkness took her was Lucian's face, twisted in horror, lunging too late across the room. She woke in a dim, unfamiliar room, wrists bound loosely to a chair, the ache in her skull sharp and immediate. "You're awake," Alfred said, crouched in front of her, his earlier gentleness entirely gone, replaced by something feverish and unraveling. "Good, I want you awake for this." "Alfred," Adelaide's voice was steady, though her heart hammered. "Let me go. This isn't going to end the way you think it will. It's going to end exactly the way I think it will." He paced, agitated, a gun tucked at his hip that she hadn't noticed before. "Richard's gone. My inheritance is gone. But I still have you, and I still have a way to make Lucian suffer before I finish him. Alfred, listen to me." She kept her voice low, deliberate, the way she'd learned to speak to frightened collectors trying to talk themselves out of a bad deal. "Killing Lucian won't give you anything. It'll only guarantee you spend the rest of your life exactly like Richard, in a cell, alone, hated by everyone who ever pretended to love you." "Everyone always pretended," Alfred said, and for a moment something young and wounded flickered behind his eyes. "My whole life, second son, Second choice, second everything. You were supposed to be mine. I could have loved you. Adelaide lied gently, buying time, watching the desperate hope bloom in his expression. If things had been different, if you hadn't done this. It's not too late, Alfred said, leaning closer. Choose me now, in front of him, and I'll let him walk away. Then call him, Adelaide said. Let's finish this. Alfred made the call, voice tight with barely restrained mania, demanding Lucian come alone within the hour. Lucian arrived exactly as instructed, unarmed, hands raised, his eyes finding Adelaide across the dim warehouse the moment he stepped through the door. Let her go, Alfred. This is between you and me. It was always between us, Alfred said. But she gets to choose first. Adelaide, he turned to her, gun raised now, wavering between the two men. Tell him you choose me. Adelaide's eyes met Lucian's across the room, his face stripped of every wall he'd ever built, raw and terrified and certain, in that instant, that he had lost the only person who had ever seen him clearly and stayed anyway. I choose myself, Adelaide said quietly. I always have. But if you're asking who I love… Alfred's face contorted, the gun swinging toward Lucian with sudden, violent finality. Adelaide moved without thinking, throwing herself between them as the shot rang out, the impact tearing through her shoulder and dropping her hard against the concrete floor. Adelaide. Lucian was across the room before the echo of the gunshot faded, disarming Alfred with brutal efficiency, driving him to the ground and pinning him there with a fury that would have ended his life if the arriving police sirens, alerted by Genevieve the moment Lucian left the tower, hadn't screamed through the warehouse doors seconds later. But Lucian barely registered any of it. He was already on his knees beside Adelaide, hands pressed hard against the wound at her shoulder, blood warm and terrifying between his fingers. Stay with me, he begged, voice breaking apart completely for the first time in his adult life. Stay with me, please, Adelaide. I can't. I lied, Adelaide whispered, vision swimming, her hand finding his with the last of her strength. In that room, I said I didn't love you. I lied. Don't talk. Save your strength. The baby, she gasped. Protect the baby. Not because it's an heir, because it's a life. I will, Lucian said, tears he hadn't shed since he was 7 years old finally breaking free. I promise you. I promise. The paramedics arrived, and the last thing Adelaide heard before darkness claimed her again was Lucian's voice, raw and pleading, refusing to let go of her hand. She woke in a hospital room 3 days later, sunlight cutting soft lines across white sheets, the steady, impossible sound of a heartbeat monitor pulsing beside her. Hers, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, the rapid flutter of a second one. The baby's fine, a voice said, rough with exhaustion and relief. Lucian sat in the chair beside her bed, looking as though he hadn't slept once in the days she'd been unconscious, heartbeats strong. You lost blood, but the surgeon says you'll recover completely. Adelaide's throat was dry, her voice a rasp. Alfred? In custody. Facing charges for attempted murder, kidnapping, and enough evidence from Richard's files to add him to every crime that came before. Lucian's hand found hers, careful, uncertain, as though he expected her to pull away. He'll never touch you again. Neither of them will. She let her fingers curl around his and watched something in his face crumble with quiet, desperate relief. I'm sorry, Lucian said, for the room, for calling it protection when it was only fear wearing a nicer word. I called it protection because I was too afraid to call it what it actually was. And what was it actually? Terror, Lucian admitted, that the only person who's ever made me feel like more than a weapon would eventually leave the way everyone else has. So, I tried to make it impossible for you to go. I turned the one good thing in my life into another version of the cage I grew up in. Love cannot live in a cage, Lucian, Adelaide said softly. It just becomes something else, something that looks like love from a distance, but isn't. I know that now. He lifted her hand, pressed it gently to his lips, and looked at her with an openness she had never seen from him before. I'm dissolving the contract. If you want to leave, you and the baby, I'll restore every asset your family lost. I'll guarantee your protection for the rest of your life. Whether you're standing beside me or 1,000 miles away, you don't owe me anything, Adelaide. Not gratitude, not loyalty, not a single second more of your life. Tears slipped down her face, and she found herself laughing, unsteady and disbelieving. You're offering me my freedom. Yes. For the first time since Marcus sold me to you, Adelaide said. Someone's finally asking what I want, instead of telling me what I owe. What do you want? She squeezed his hand. I want to stay. Not because I'm carrying your child. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I want to stay because somewhere between a blind girl learning the sound of your footsteps and a woman watching you finally choose to stop, I fell in love with you. Lucian Sinclair. And I want to see what we could be, if you let me stay free while I do it. Lucian pressed his forehead to hers, breathing unsteady, and for the first time in either of their lives, the silence between them held nothing but relief. They were married again 3 weeks after Adelaide left the hospital, not the cold, contractual ceremony of before, but a small gathering in the manor's garden, beneath the same rose bushes she had once learned to navigate by scent and memory alone. Genevieve stood as witness, tears in her eyes that she refused, on principle, to let anyone comment on. There was no board present, no lawyers, no clause about heirs or silence or compliance. Only 2 people who had survived being used as instruments in other people's schemes, choosing this time, freely, to belong to each other. Say it again, Lucian murmured to her that evening, his hand resting over the growing curve of her stomach as they sat together on the terrace, the last of the sunset bleeding gold across the garden. Not because I asked before, because I want to hear it when nothing is being taken from either of us. I love you, Adelaide said, and this time the words came without hesitation, without fear, without the shadow of a locked door hanging over them. I love the man who learned to change a bandage before he learned how to say something kind. I love the man who stopped his own fist because I asked him to. I love that you're still learning every day how to want something without preparing to lose it. I love you, Lucian answered, quieter than she'd ever heard him. I loved you before I understood what that word was supposed to feel like. I think some part of me has loved you since the night neither of us understood what was happening to us. Not because of that night, but because somewhere in the fog, I remember trying to be gentle with you. I didn't know your name. I just knew I didn't want to hurt you. Adelaide's throat tightened. We were both hurt by people who never earned the right to touch either of our lives. Not anymore, Lucian said. Not ever again. 7 months later, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter in the same hospital wing where she had once woken to the sound of 2 heartbeats. They named her Elena, after Lucian's mother, and Genevieve held her great-granddaughter, with tears sliding freely down her weathered face, whispering that some cycles, at last, had finally been broken instead of repeated. Lancaster Industries was restored under Adelaide's direct leadership within the year, rebuilt not as a shipping empire, but as a foundation for authenticated art restoration and recovery, dedicated to tracking down pieces stolen through exactly the kind of laundering scheme that had destroyed her family. Sinclair Industries underwent its own quiet restructuring. Board seats filled with people who had earned Lucian's trust rather than inherited a claim to it. Richard was convicted on every charge: embezzlement, fraud, art theft, sabotage, and conspiracy to commit murder, and would not see freedom again in his lifetime. Alfred was sentenced separately, his obsession finally recognized by the courts as the danger it had always been, locked away where his desperate hunger for what was never his could no longer touch anyone. Adelaide opened the Lancaster Foundation for the Arts that spring, her parents' names carved into the entrance beside a single restored painting. The true Garden of Eden, recovered from a storage vault Richard had used to hide his stolen collection, hung in a place of honor where her mother's real, imperfect, trembling brushstrokes could finally be seen by anyone who cared to look. Lucian stood beside her at the opening, not in front of her, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, Elena asleep against his shoulder, and when a reporter asked what the foundation meant to the Sinclair family, he answered without hesitation. It means the woman who was sold as property to save someone else's debts became the reason our entire family learned what it actually means to be free. Adelaide had been sold as a pawn, married as a contract, doubted as a liar, caged as a possession. But in the end, she had not become powerful because Lucian Sinclair chose her. She became powerful because over and over again, in the dark and in the light, she had chosen herself. And in doing so, she had taught a man the whole city feared that love, real love, could never survive behind locked doors, that the only kind worth keeping was the kind you were free to walk away from, and chose every single day to stay. So, could you have forgiven Lucian after everything he put Adelaide through, even knowing where his fear came from? Was Adelaide right to hide her recovered sight, even from the man she was falling in love with? And out of everything in this story, the pregnancy reveal, the auction and the forged painting, the boardroom exposure, or Adelaide taking that bullet, which moment hit you hardest? Tell me in the comments. And if this story pulled you in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good redemption arc. There's a lot more where this came from.